Yeah. Okay, so hello, hello again, officially everyone. Welcome to this discussion, which is mainly a tribute to one of our most important, often most misunderstood filmmakers. And as most of you know, Ghatak's birth centenary is just around 10 days away, 9 days away. But there's also recognition of this big anthology, Labor of Love by Shamo, which captures so many facets of Ritwik Ghatak's work and life. And so, Shamo, very public congratulations from all of us, I'm sure, to start with, um, and to all of us who are in the book as well. So, I just wanted to say, I just saw a heart with
Yeah.
Pradyumna's name going up. Zoom has really done these alarming things. Uh, Anyway, so I just wanted to say before I give the stage to Shamo. Uh, there's something, we were in postgrad together, Shamo and I, 27 years ago, 26, 27 years ago. And I have a memory, a very fragmented memory. I don't know if Shamo remembers this, probably not, because this is not his strong suite. And that enables me to sometimes make up things to embarrass him as well. But this is a real memory, a fragmented memory of Shamo uh, telling me the broad storyline of a Jantrik. Uh, Pretty much everything. He told me almost everything about the film, including and spoiled the ending for me. That very poignant last shot with the car's horn. I won't say more about that. And I got to watch the film myself on a really poor VCD print with poor subtitles, terrible experience, bitter medicine, watching important filmmaker because it has to be done no matter what the circumstances. This was a few years later, and I think when I came to the end, that's when I actually remembered Shamo telling me the story of it. Happily, of course, this year I had a much better experience of watching a Jantrik and a few other Ritwik Ghatak films, which I've written about in my own piece. But I just want to turn this over to you, Shamo, now. Get this underway by having you talk a bit about your relationship with Ritwik Ghatak, both at a personal level, because as we know, there's a family connection there. Even though you never knew him personally, he died a few months before you were born. Uh, but in terms of the personal connect, the family connect, and also of course in terms of your experience of his cinema, what that was like, what your feelings about his work were initially, how they changed over time, and what you were trying to do with this book in terms of getting a canvas. uh,
Hmm.
if you can just tell us a little bit about that to start with.
Sure. Before that, can I just take 10 seconds to just tell you that of the people we've just been admitting, of course, Amborish and Jay are contributors, as I am. Um, C.S. Venkiteswaran has just joined. He's written a wonderful piece on Ghatak vis-a-vis Malayalam cinema and the Kerala Film Society movement and so on and so forth. So maybe we can bring CS in at some stage, of course. And also Karthika has joined from Westland. She's the publisher of the book. Um, so I don't know whether they want to come in or so on, but just to introduce them to you, to the rest of the people. Um, yeah, really, no connection with Ghatak really. You grow up in Calcutta through the 80s or 90s when you're teens, and after that, and Satyajit Ray is what you watch. And Satyajit Ray is what you love. Um, Much more accessible, much more about stories, much more polished. The little Ghatak you watch is obviously, like you say, it's bad quality, poor prints, occasionally on Doordarshan, subjects that are not as accessible, certainly to a privileged boy in urban Calcutta in the 80s. The subjects are not exciting, it's depressing. Um, and of course, this is only comparing him to Ray, not even bringing in Bollywood, which is so much more exciting, and all that being there. I mean, if you had to choose what to watch, you knew what to watch, and it wasn't Ghatak. So I suppose getting to Ghatak was a matter of getting older. Um, in my case, and this is probably not something we should go on for too long about, in my case, 2014 changed me in many ways. Um, Maybe not, okay, certainly made me more politically aware, made me go back and revisit things in a bigger way from the past that had nothing to do maybe directly with 2014, but just becoming more politically aware. And I won't say there's a direct connection between that and appreciating Ghatak's films, which had already started. But I suppose you just think about things a bit differently. And it's a function of growing up as much as it is a function of being aware. I guess the two are connected. And and reading and just getting older and therefore reading a lot more about Ghatak and his work and listening to people and um just yeah just learning to appreciate what he did a lot more and looking at layers in his filmmaking, whether it came to the weird camera angles that once upon a time might have felt like, a Superman of Malegaon kind of thing, where it's an amateur person doing something which doesn't really make sense, to understanding the logic behind it, or understanding how and why certain things were done. Reading people like, even in this book, there are essays by people like Moinak Bishash and Gautam Ghosh and others who have obviously spent a lot more time than I have studying Ghatak and cinema in general, or the theories of cinema, and talking about certain aspects of his filmmaking which were about perhaps Soviet grammar, which many of us might not have been exposed to in as big a way growing up as some others, as
Thanks.
also um, as also breaking grammar.
Good
Uh,
morning.
you know,
Hmm.
about grammar existing to be twisted and tweaked and broken, and what sort of magic can be created with it. So, what I'm trying to say is, this is not a, I'm sure it'll come up here and there over the next few months as I probably speak to more people about the book, but Ray versus Ghatak and so on. But Ray was just so much more accessible and continues to be. And but as you get more and more exposed to Ghatak, you see what cinema could do and couldn't do, where imagination clashes with the limitations of the camera, which say Ray knew what cinema could do or the camera could do. Ghatak wanted the camera and cinema to do more, is a very simple way of saying it. And if I'm cross-questioned, I probably won't be able to explain this answer. But that's what I'm trying to get at. There's the magic of experimentation and innovation, which within his very limited means, which we know of now, the fact that he was sort of sidelined by the more powerful people in the Bengal film industry, um, or so we hear. I don't know if that's true. Maybe that's just something the Ghatak romantics propagate. I don't know. It was before I was born, as Jay pointed out. So these are things you hear, and you know that this person worked with very severe limitations without too many people backing him. And plus, obviously, the alcoholism and everything that we also know about his indisciplined life and perhaps irresponsible life. And throughout history, I mean, whether it's artists or writers or whoever it is, you sort of have a soft spot for the wayward lot, don't you? I mean, the ones that don't quite conform. I think that's one of the things that create this mystique, and also in my case, a love for Ghatak, which has nothing to do, I would like to believe, nothing to do with my sort of relationship with him, which is basically that he was my mother's youngest paternal uncle, and I never met him. And so it probably doesn't have anything to do with that. It just has to do with discovering a filmmaker somewhat late in life, though, of course, I'd watched his films earlier, but really discovering him later and falling in love with, or being fascinated by, maybe not in love with, but being fascinated by both the person and the filmmaker, which perhaps I've written a bit about him in magazines and websites in the past, but certainly had no plans of doing a book. Um, and people who know me know that my previous film book was about the Ramsay brothers. So it's not a natural fit, going from Ramsay to Ghatak. So it certainly wasn't planned. It happened. I'm glad it did. Yeah.
Very reductive question, possibly, but was there a particular film at a particular point in your more sentient appreciation of Ritwik Ghatak, or your more informed appreciation of Ritwik Ghatak? Was there a particular film that became uh, a major entry point for you? I'm asking because, as you know, because we've talked about it and I put it in the essay as well. For me, that film was earlier this year, and it was actually one of his most under the radar films, Bari Theke Paliye, which of course has the English title The Runaway, which I just sort of only vaguely even knew of the film, and when I watched it, of course, it was an eye opener because it's probably the least political, or at least the least overtly political of his work. It's a film, about a child with a child protagonist. It's everything that someone like me 10 years ago would never have associated with Ritwik Ghatak, with that daunting, somewhat intimidating name. And that became my entry point, and I've written about that in my piece as well. But was there such a film for you, or a discovery or a rediscovery of such a film?
Well, Bari Theke Paliye is also a strange Ghatak film that is actually shown on TV a lot in Bengal and was through the 80s and 90s because obviously the children's film. And Ajantrik is possibly the film that is, again, very accessible. It's somewhat linear, and of course, as you read more, you discover more layers about it, and rewatch it and rewatch it. But as such, even if you want to get into that, it's a fairly straightforward, likable film, or enjoyable film, so to say. But what you're talking about is obviously later, you know, and that has to probably be Subarnarekha, which is a magnificent film in so many ways that as a youngster I largely ignored. I wasn't, yeah, it was very depressing. It was many things. And yeah, that's probably the entry point. Um, in a way, you've suddenly asked me this question. So obviously I haven't thought about the answer and all that. But Ajantrik and Bari Theke Paliye were movies I liked well before this, maybe even in the 90s or 80s. But
Right.
more recently, it has to be Subarnarekha. And partition has become a topic of interest for me over the last few years. I won't say in a huge way, like I can't hold forth on it or anything like that, but it's a subject I read about from time to time and have read a fair bit about. And it's a subject that interests me and more. I mean, I suppose people from Calcutta, as people from Bengal, as people from Punjab, whether they're born then or after or whenever there is, it's there. It's there whether you sort of think about it or not. It exists in our lives. And Shubhanu I think, touched me more recently. I mean, forget the ending. The last bit is, I would say, comparable to anything in world cinema that I've watched.
Yeah, yeah.
Where
No, no,
but
it's great. It's brilliant, and it's just so sort of it's and there's so many modes,
yeah, yeah,
so many tones, so many moods that just sort of come together and are brilliantly expressed. I mean, that whether the way that I mean again, this isn't a spoiler or anything, but the way Subarna Rekha moves towards its ending, and moves from a somewhat crazily surreal comedy scene in a nightclub to something much darker is just and it's just done so organically. It just didn't feel like there was anything forced or unnatural about it. It was just part of the DNA of the film, how the film was moving towards that culmination. It's great. I
yeah,
agree absolutely.
yeah. And I've thought, perhaps wrongly, most certainly wrongly, that maybe the film was conceived there and taken back to its start because it's really such an incredible ending. But it's a film with again layers, as always. I found the presence in a major way of a perhaps lower caste boy as one of the main protagonists interesting. Abhiram, who is adopted by this Brahminish sounding lead, and so on. So there's that layer. Um, there's the rebellion of the woman, there's the travel from one place to the other, the homelessness aspect of Ghatak's films, which exists, of course, in a different way in Bari Theke Pali as well, and Jantrek, all those other films. But that sort of, I think, took me back to Megha Katara and Komal Gandhar and everything else, where that sort of thread of homelessness and the search for roots and the search for a home is kind of what binds all of Ghatak's films. And in Ghatak's case, interestingly, as I've discovered more recently while doing the book, he had a home, he had his roots, he had everything. He chose to give it up. So it's quite the opposite when it comes to him. Maybe he wanted to live that life, to know more about this life or whatever it might be. Um, Unfortunately, there's no proper biography. I know there are some, but perhaps no proper biography of people who spent a lot of time with him. Because obviously, I'm an interested party here, but even outside of that, I'm sure people would find it very interesting because he was an interesting man. He was a man very different from most others we know. So, it would be nice to know more about him from people who were there at the time.
Yeah.
What made him do what he did?
We will be opening this up shortly to to anybody else who wants to talk about they wants to because I know some of you here have been watching Ghatak films diligently over the past week or so, and we also have a couple of contributors. I'd like to ask Amborish, for instance, about his angle, the angle that he's taken in this piece, which is Ritwik Ghatak's theater work and his life in theater. But before we get to that, I just want to touch on one other thing since you mentioned, this idea of perceptions that we have of somebody. One of the things I personally find very interesting about Ghatak is that uh, he often said in interviews, including one interview that you had sent me when I was working on my essay, that he was not particularly interested in cinema as a form. He really he was almost dismissive about it. He didn't think there was anything special about cinema. He thought of it as a tool to say the things that he wanted to say, and to to be political or whatever, or to to deal with certain things. He claimed not to be interested in it at a formal level, for instance. And yet, and as we know, the 1940s and the 50s was a period when
Yeah.
around the world, including in India, you had the first real generation of film nerds, film scholars who would become filmmakers themselves, practitioners themselves. Satyajit Ray and Chidanand Dasgupta set up their society in 1947 or 48, I think it was. Around that time, Ghatak was working with IPTA. He was with IPTA. Uh, he, and yet, this same man, I mean, if you look closely at his films, you see so much that there's so much cinematic inventiveness in them, so much that's inventive simply by virtue of doing the things that you're not supposed to do as per regular film grammar. So you're almost constructing a new grammar. And he also taught at the FTII.
Hmm.
And I remember this conversation with you where you pointed out that the people you've spoken to always said that when he was teaching at the FTII, regardless of these impressions, these again slightly reductive impressions we have of him as someone who was immersed in his liquor or whatever, that an alcoholic, whatever. But when he was teaching, he was always stone cold sober, and he was very much the professor who's doing things in a very straightforward way. So, is there a contradiction there? Do you find something there that we might need to reconcile? That on the one hand, he claimed not to be interested in cinema for cinema's sake. On the other hand, he taught it to students.
And by all accounts, was a master at it. There are many people who owe a great debt of gratitude to Ghatak for what he taught them. Not necessarily theories, but in just talking them through his cinema and explaining why this was this and that was that. I thought he brought in, not just me. I mean, as you'll find in the essays, I think he brought a lot of theater into cinema. Um, the limits of someone's yawning. So the limits of what a frame can do versus what can be fitted into a stage. I think there was a lot of that. There were many scenes, especially in Nagorik, his first film, which to my mind is not a great film. Really, it's okay. I mean, it's got a great premise, but might not have been a very professionally made film. There's a lot happening all over, and there are things happening off camera also. It's almost like the camera moves from here to there and you find something happening, and it moves a bit more and you find something more happening, and it goes here and something more is happening, which to me looks like theater, where of course the viewer is looking at the main people bang in the center, but there are two people on the corner doing something else, or there's someone doing something else there, and so on and so forth. And yes, he was not interested in cinema by his own admission. He was just interested in the medium that allowed him to talk to the most people. And at that point in the early 50s, before that it was theater, when he moved from short stories and poems to theater, he found that it was giving him a bigger audience than writing was, and then cinema happened, and he had no formal training, of course. Well, nor did Ray or any of these other people really, outside of watching cinema and no formal training. None of them went to FTII, for example. But he found that in cinema, and till 76 when he died, there was probably no newer medium that did that. If there had been, from what he said, he would have probably moved to that. um,
It's interesting you say that about Nagarek, because I mentioned this, I think, on the film group yesterday or today or something. I watched his 1965 short film Fear, which was
yes.
made at the FTI, and some of the things you said about Nagarek seem to apply to that as well. Of course, that's much more of a, it's a film that's trying to be visually show offish as well, and it's doing all these. By the nature of its setting as well, it's set 20 years in the future from there, in 1985, in a bomb shelter with the atomic bomb theme, etc. Very vivid close-ups. Some very interesting blocking is going on there, and that's actually, I was thinking maybe I can just bring Amborish in here now, because
Yeah.
the Amborish, you've in your piece you've talked about Ghatak in the theater. Now, both the film that both Nagarek, what Chamo was saying about Nagarek, and what I experienced of the short film Fear, it felt very much like someone who was really adept with stage design, or with a stage setting, and with
Mm.
the blocking and the movement and the choreography of a set of people in an enclosed space. And of course, Fear was still, to my mind, also a very cinematic film, but these are, of course, semantics. Can you tell us a little bit about your piece, and what you find interesting about Ritwik Ghatak's work in theater, and how it connects with his cinematic work?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So, I didn't actually know a lot about Ghatak's work in theater before I was given this piece to work on, and I was interestingly working on Utpal Datta at this point of time, and I was also kind of dabbling around IPTA and the history of IPTA and all of that. So that was it was a coincidence that that came along, and I was really fascinated by his journey in theater. I think it might be a little reductive to say this, but there are these three distinct stages in his creativity, or whatever you may call it. One part is some 50 odd short stories that he wrote. He was obsessed with. He was kind of he thought of himself as a writer initially, and wrote these brilliant short stories, and he was dabbling with literature till a certain point, and then he thought that probably literature is not the right medium to reach out to a sufficient number of people with a certain kind of impact, and then he moved on to theater till uh, I think the mid 50s, when he realized that theater has the same problem. It is only reaching out to the people in the presence of that play. I mean, it's temporal. It's it's for a certain number of people and for a certain period. And then he moved on to cinema, and then finally, I mean, that famous statement of his where he says that the day I find a
Yeah.
better medium, I would kick cinema on the backside, and
Yeah.
I'd move to that medium to reach out to people. Um, so that was very fascinating. I mean, theater for him was again much like cinema later on, a mode to tell the kind of stories that he wanted to tell. Uh, the pain and the aggression that he had of see. There was this play called Nobanno, which had a huge impact on him.
Which you
Bijan
mentioned
Mott,
in your piece
yeah,
from 1944, right? And you
1944.
mentioned that the 15-year-old Utpal Dutt was also
Yeah,
influenced.
yeah. Yeah, so they were so Bijan Bhattacharya wrote that play. Bijan, who famously did those roles in Meghadakatara and then with uh, uh, Shubhan Rekha. So that play was seminal in by way of shaping a lot of things in theatre in India. So it was a shaping influence on Utpal Dutt. It sort of flagged off IPTA in India, and it was a great influence on Ritwik Ghatak. And these people, as teenagers, were also kind of experiencing the kind of horrors of the Bengal famine at that point of time and what is happening on the streets. I mean, we have only read accounts, some of which I have kind of quoted in there. I mean, one can only imagine, one can't even imagine the kind of horrors that they were experiencing every day. And so that kind of reflected in the kind of theater these people wanted to do. He was also part of the people's writer group, the Progressive Writers
Progressive
Association,
Writers Group, yeah.
PWA, and then moving on to IPTA. Initially, interestingly, in the initial IPTA phase, he was not writing so many plays. He was just acting in a lot of plays. He was acting in a lot of plays directed by Utpal Dutt and by others. Sometimes he was directing them. So mostly he was not writing plays during the IPTA time. He was hugely influenced by what was happening, and he was participating in these plays, but he was not involved in a lot of stagecraft and directing, if I remember correctly. And then in the later half, when the disintegration of the CPM happened, the split of the CPI and no. So when the Communist Party was kind of illegalized or banned right after independence, that was the period when the whole IPTA movement, everybody was laying low, nothing was happening on the IPTA front. In 1950, again, everybody came back, and that is when he was made the head of the central squad of IPTA in Calcutta. And
Hmm.
that is the phase when he started writing plays. Early 1950s, he started writing these plays. Again, things that deeply influenced him. There was a bunch of suicides happening in Kolkata at that point of time. And he was writing a play called Dolil, and he set it aside. He wrote a report for a newspaper of these series of suicides, and he was so impacted by them that he ended up writing a play called Jala, which is roughly, I don't know how to translate it, burn, pain, yeah. So, so he wrote that play. So that was the beginning, and he wrote a bunch of plays again, centering around the what was happening politically in Bengal at that time. And one big part of his narrative, even in plays, was was the partition, right? Um, and then, of course, I think somewhere around mid 50s, late 50s, his association with IPTA was kind of, he stopped working for IPTA or being associated with IPTA. And after that, I think he wrote only two plays, and he translated Brecht, two of Brecht's plays, The Life of Galileo and Caucasian Chalk Circle or something. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question. I'm just rattling off, the
No,
timeline of his plays and all of that. But probably what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think there was a lot of stagecraft and direction in the kind of his association with plays. His association with the with theater was probably as non-technical as it was with cinema. One would like to believe, in terms of the what he was going through, what he was experiencing, and trying to tell the kind of stories that he wanted to tell. A lot of anger, a lot of agony that he wanted to express. Yeah, so that was his association with theater, and then probably he realized cinema is a better medium to probably mold those expressions better. I don't know.
Hmm.
Thanks a lot for that. It's an important context provider. And again, for those of you who have the book, please do read Amborish's piece along with all the others, which were, especially the ones that were written specifically for the anthology, because there are all these perspectives, and many of the perspectives are, they aren't informed or to the manner born, because in fact, I mean, I would actually point out that very few of us are really, you know uh, to the manner born when it comes to Ritwik Ghatak anyway, right? Even people, I've always felt on the outside of things, because I wasn't, Bengali, and I wasn't sort of growing up surrounded by that culture and so on. And I remember Shamo telling me back in our postgrad days that I hadn't really watched Gupi Gain Baga Bain the way I thought I had, because you don't get a film like that if you can't get the language firsthand. And if you can't just rely on even very good subtitles. So of course, if a very accessible Satyajit Ray film, was removed in that sense, then you can imagine what a film like what a Ritwik Ghatak film might be like. But one other thing I want to just talk about, and Shamo, you mentioned that you might want to just touch on this, is one of my most pleasing discoveries when I really got into watching Ritwik Ghatak earlier this year, that there's a lot of playfulness in his work. There's humor, there's playfulness. Uh, I remember that very funny, snarky line from a Satyajit Ray essay, which was directed at two of Ghatak's students, Mani Kaul and Kumar Shani. And the line which I have here is what Ray wrote was, "It's strange that both Kaul and Shani should acknowledge their debt to Ritwik Ghatak, who taught them at Pune, when the only Ghatak trait they seem to have imbibed is a lack of humor." And it's such a quotable line, and it's there in, you find it in many anthologies and so on. It added to the impression that one had of Ritwik Ghatak. He's here someone who's obsessed with this great human tragedy that happened in the 1940s, and all of his work is centered around that, intense, overtly political. There's unsparing in his cinematic expression. And then, of course, I see a film like Bari Theke Pal Pali Hai, and then I see the funnier parts of films like Ajantrik or Shobarna Rekha, and I was really taken aback. But Shamu, do you want to talk about that a bit? And you mentioned that somebody else might also like to weigh in. I don't know if any of the other contributors are here.
Yeah. So let me answer your question first.
Yeah.
And then I just want to go back to what, if you don't mind, go back to what Amborish was talking about and bring in CS, Venkiteswaran, who I just mentioned, has written about Ghatak's impact or influence or presence in Malayalam cinema, because we were talking about lack of subtitles, poor prints, the context of his films, which made it difficult for you to access Ghatak earlier. And Kerala is so far removed from partitioned India, and that is something that CS actually talks about in the essay as well. So after answering you, I'll just go to CS with that question. Yes, of course, there are bits in Ghatak cinema that are very funny. I mean, um, so there are funny films, right? I mean, there are films that are fun, and there are films with quotable lines that you throw around. And Ray, for example, had many of those, especially in Gopika and Bakabain or the Peluda films and so on, where you have these lines that are funny or smart or whatever it is. And Kathak was not about that. We accept that. But there were these sequences that maybe because I don't know if they were intentionally funny. I think a couple of them were, but a lot of it was perhaps funny in a theatrical way, in the way, if you bring theater acting to cinema, some things appear funny. They're exaggerated, sort of acting or exaggerated voice modulation and so on and so forth that made certain things funny. That is of course unintentionally funny. But there are also these characters played by Bijon Bhattacharya, for example, in Meghita Katara, which is quite clearly funny. He's a funny man who obviously the trajectory of his life is not fun or anything like that, but there are funny bits. Or Abhi Bhattacharya in Shubhana Rekha, like you mentioned, doing these funny things, which of course lead to the ending, which is incredible.
Johor Rai and Shubham.
Yes. Johor Rai in a very small but fantastic role in Bari Theke Palia, which of course had its moment of levity or whatever it might be. But Johor Rai certainly, and Keshto Mukherjee made his debut in a Ghatak film, so there was of course, yeah, it was funny, but it was like one of those exaggerated funny, not necessarily funny. Yeah, so all these people were there, and but more than that, if I can, I was just making some notes here earlier today about only to bring in the fact that he was a funny man, and of course the family members talk about how entertaining he was, how fun-loving he was, even if he wasn't funny directly, not making everyone laugh, but just having a fun time with everyone else. There are these, you know, bits that if I can just read out. Um, Gautam Ghosh writes. Gautam Ghosh met him in the 70s, perhaps between Tita Shekti Nodinam in 72, 73 and his death in 76. Perhaps that's the period Gautam Ghosh met Ghatak in. And Gautam Babu was actually hoping to be present here, but he unfortunately lost his wife very recently. We were discussing this chat, and he said, I'd like to join. I'd like to meet young film enthusiasts and so on. But anyway, maybe some other time. He writes, Jukti Tokko Ar Goppo was on the one hand, a somewhat autobiographical film. This is his last film, Reason, Stories, and the Debate, or the other way, Reason, Debate, and a Story. A personal film, and on the other, a statement. It also had the familiar Ritwik touch of mixing the real, the unreal, and the surreal. We had attended the shooting, and then we were at the dubbing. Ramesh Joshi, the editor who had worked on all of Ritwik's films except Tita Shekti Nodinam, since that had been made with technicians in Bangladesh, was in charge. But something was wrong. The film had not been shot with live sync, so everything had to be dubbed. We heard Ramesh Joshi say, Ritwik Babu, this is out of sync. We wondered what could be done, since this wouldn't work. The lips are moving here, the voices are elsewhere. What was the way out? My friend Jagannath Guho and I asked Ritwik. He said, quite casually, have all of you read Eisenstein? We said we had a little bit. It was tough to grasp, and so on and so forth. Ritwik was being mischievous, as he sometimes was. Eisenstein has written about synchronous and asynchronous sound, he said, referring to Sound and Image, written by Eisenstein, Pudovkin, and Gregory Alexandrov. We laughed. How's this possible? How can you make a film where the sync is off? All right, Ramesh, tell me where there's a problem, I'll fix it. So that was also Ritwik. He could be mischievous, and he tried to justify his mistakes with intellectual arguments. That's one. And in Jukti Tokko Goppo, there's a bit of the same thing that comes in the film, which, like we discussed, is a bit autobiographical. Neelkanto Bagchi, that's his character, says, for a bottle I will lie or steal, but for name or fame or position I will never lie, which obviously comes across as what it is, just a claim. So the young man who's with him says, you have practiced that pose long enough to become an adept at it. So Neelkanto sort of laughs and says, you have caught me out. So that also brings me to something else, which we may or may not talk about today, that he really was a boy who never grew up, in many ways. And that's sort of the impression I take away of him from this whole exercise. Again, Jukti Tokko Goppo, this is again Gautam Ghosh. There was also Utpal Dattu, who had played the role of Shotrujit, but he was busy shooting in Bombay for a Hindi film and the dubbing was happening. So Ritwik turned to Jagannath and said, hey, you dub for Utpal. Jagannath was having none of it. He said, how can I do that? Utpal Dattu is my guru in the theatre. How can I dub for him? Ritwik was not going to let him go. You have to do it. You do it. And when Utpal is back, he can redo it. The next scene is still fresh in my memory. We were at India Labs as usual. Jagannath started running and Ritwik gave him chase through the gullies of India Labs, shouting, hey, Jaga, stop, come back right now. Eventually, Jagannath had to do it, and Utpal Dattu redid it when it came back. And Shamya Choudhury, there's a wonderful video interview with Shamya Choudhury on YouTube if you want to check, of a very successful, almost iconic, an iconic Bengali leading actor, male, female, whatever. And her love for Ritwik Ghatak and what she says about Ritwik Ghatak, it's really wonderful. It's wonderful at many levels. Talks about how Ritwik would stalk her because Ritwik probably didn't pay her for the movies she did. And obviously she had to make a living, and she had signed up with other filmmakers to where she was the heroine of their films, more mainstream films, and given them dates. So Ritwik would turn up at her shoots and just take her away, convince her to leave, and take her away and do a 5 minute shoot and return her. And how she did most of Komol Gandhar like that, and says that, if you look closely, my makeup is not even in many places because I refused to take my makeup off because I had to go back within 1 hour and continue shooting for that other film. So a lot of shots are actually taken from the back in darkness and so on and so forth. But this is really funny. As I was saying, she writes, I couldn't shoot properly for Komal Gandhar since I was quite busy with other projects. But that created no problems for Ritikda. He was a magician. Let me tell you why I say that. After he had completed the shooting of Komal Gandhar, he took me to see the rushes. I saw myself singing Aaj Jyotsna Rate Shobai Gache Bone. But how did that happen? I hadn't shot for it. I turned to Ritikda, stunned, and asked him about it. He said, laughing, you were not there, so I got Punu, his assistant Punu Sen, who's a man, of course, to wear a sari and do the shot. Imagine, it was so perfect that even I couldn't tell the difference. How could the audience tell?
Yeah, and when the story came up on our online group, I remember Tipu pointing out Sari Dhaka Punu. that's
Yeah. Yeah, Arun Khopkar has stories. Can I tell you one more? I mean, these are
yeah,
not
please do.
funny.
Yeah,
These are not ha funny, but just, tells you a bit about the man. One late evening, this is after the vice principalship. This is when he would go back to do some workshops at FTII with later students like Arun Khopkar and Ketan Mehta, Janu Borua, who have all written in the anthology, later students. So one late evening, we met Ritwik outside the main theater of the FTII. We wanted him to show us Silence, an Ingmar Bergman film, with us and give his comments. The curator of the NFII at the time, P.K. Nair, was also present. Ritwik said, Nair, show them Silence by that rascal of a Bergman. It was almost midnight. Janu Borua separately keeps saying that Ritwik had these choices abuses reserved only for Bergman, but that comes in the book. It was a bit of a love-hate, sort of one-sided, of course. I'm sure Bergman never heard of Ritwik, but Ritwik had that relationship with Bergman. It was almost midnight. A sinking man clutches at straws. Thinking on his feet, Nair said, if Bergman is a rascal, what's the point of showing the film? Ritikda had started to walk towards the theater. He stopped suddenly and dramatically turned back, looked over his left shoulder at Nair, raised his left eyebrow, and said, if I call him a rascal, that's between him and me. For these boys, he's a great artist. Ritikda had never traveled abroad, so there was no chance he had ever met Bergman, but there was such conviction in his words that it went beyond fact. It spoke of a spiritual relationship between two geniuses. I can go on, but that would probably be more of the same. Can I do what I said? Can I bring in CS, please, for a bit?
Yeah. Please. Before you do that, let me just quote from an interview that you've included in the book, where he's saying he's paying compliments to some other great international filmmaker.
Yes.
Fellini has sold out. Antonioni doesn't have the mentality to go deep enough into these things. Ingmar Bergman is a knave. And so on. It goes on, but yeah, this sort of thing is always fun.
Yeah.
You were saying.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, so nice to have you here. I'm sure most of the people who follow film writing know of or have read CS. Wonderful to have you here. CS, so that is the question, what I mentioned a little while back. This was a filmmaker whose films were not easily available, whose films were not of great quality visually, whose films were not subtitled well. For people in Kerala like yourself, there was no context with the subjects that he was talking about. So how did he become so popular in Kerala? And I might as well say is much more popular in Kerala perhaps than in West Bengal.
Maybe. One thing is even now, even at the moment, if you look at, I was just trying to, I was fascinated by this Komal Gandha movie, I've been watching it again and again. And if you look at the quality of subtitles, it's so bad, doesn't actually capture the most of the nuances of the songs or the context or anything like that. So it's not a problem that has been solved, but it still haunts, Ghatak movies. Actually, you don't have good subtitled prints of the film, which is a huge kind of barrier for someone who is outside Bengal, who doesn't know the Bengali, culture in all its, depth nuances and variety, it's very difficult to enter Ghatak, to understand Ghatak deeply. So for us, actually, like, in many parts of India, like all the cineas and film society movements, you had this, Ghatak versus Ray kind of thing. And you had these three icons, Ghatak, Sen, and Ray, groups of people, arguing for each of them and all that. So when you look back, what made Ghatak difficult for an audience like those in Kerala was that the kind of narratives, the kind of visual format, the kind of styles and references that Ray or Sen films had were much more, easier to, understand, comprehend. You can relate to it immediately. For instance, Ray, because we have read Tagore, all the Tagore works have been translated. All of Vibhuti, but Kerala has been a huge, translator of these works of Bengal. So we know the cultural history and the ethos of Bengal. So we could immediately relate to Ray and Sen because of our leftist kind of leanings and background and a lot of entanglements and engagements with IPTA and left politics, socialist movements and all that. So we could immediately relate to both of them. We knew what they were talking about. But with Bhatta, the problem was that he was so deeply into the cultural roots of Bengal. Like he uses a lot of very interesting folk songs. He goes to Upanishads, then he talks about very many references about the history of Bengal, a lot of personalities, musical traditions, ritual traditions, all kinds of things. So which is very difficult to actually immediately relate. It's not so-called universal kind of thing to, and you have to know him, maybe you have to get to know the background of his works. For instance, if you want to understand Komal Gandha, for instance, you have to be, know very much about IPTA movement, those times. Then you also need to know about music. You have to know about folk musical traditions like Bhatyali or whatever he's Angimoni and all that he's trying to using into it. Then naturally this tradition of the whole trauma of partition. So a lot of layers to it: political, social, historical, musical, all kinds of things. So that is what makes Ghatak unique and also what makes him difficult. So in a way, if you look at the film writing, history of film writing in India on Indian films, you can see there's, very easy way in which, comfortable way in which people engage with Ray and Sen doesn't happen with Ghatak. Because you have to know much more. You have to engage with those films in a much deeper, nuanced way to actually, to write about it. Which is also a kind of, which I would also say is also a limitation of Indian writing in English, or also theorizing about Indian cinema in Indian context. Because that Ghatak could have given us much more, looking at his films, analyzing his films or appreciating his films would have given us much more better, more nuanced, more rooted tools to understand Indian cinematic traditions, which we didn't actually explore or didn't take the effort to actually do, and took the easy options of Ray and Sen, which was much more easier to actually deal with. Not that there were lesser filmmakers, but their formats, their traditions, their influences, their narrative styles were much more easier to relate to. You had the parallels. You had you can actually relate them with a lot of literary traditions, also traditions from even within cinema and world cinema. For instance, the way in which Ray was taught, the way in which Ray is over, deals with cinema is much more easier to deal with. And also Sen is also again very comfortable with Kerala audience, but Ghatak was not. Yeah, and I think that is one thing which I think we need to really address, and which would give us much more insights into how to think cinema from a Ghatakian perspective, would open up a lot of theoretical possibilities, I think, which would give us much more deeper kind of understanding about Indian cinema itself, which is what Ghatak offers to you.
Yeah. While on that, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think I get the impression, from looking at a lot of the cinema books, including the academic and semi-academic Indian film books that have come out over the last 10 years or so. I feel like there's increasing work being done on Ghatak in academia now. Which also perhaps ties in with what you're saying, that this need to look at someone who perhaps wasn't recognized enough in his own time, and to see the many things that we can learn in terms of that intersectionality between rooted Indian storytelling forms and cinematic forms, the cinematic storytelling. I think there has been quite a bit of academic work in the
Yeah,
last few years
yeah,
on.
absolutely. Which is part of the reason I wanted to do this book, which is to have an accessible book
Yeah.
on Ghatak. And before I move on, CS, I'll send you a poster of one of Ghatak's films to put behind you for your next chat.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, no. I just yeah, you mentioned that there were the couple of other people who you would like to get in. I don't know, is Karthika still here? Does she want to say nice things about the book that she's published? Uh,
Karthika is here. I saw her name.
hmm.
Does she
Yes,
want
yes,
to talk?
very
Hi,
much here. Sorry, I was on
hi,
mute. Can you
hi.
hear me?
Say nice things about the book. Come.
First, you have to say, Jay, that this is looking really good, isn't it? Isn't it such a handsome volume?
Sorry. Yeah, well, I've already said that all over my social media and on all my film groups. I've said it, at great length.
Yeah.
I've used
No,
many.
jokes aside, I just think that this is one of those film books that go deep and far and range across themes that, while one sees books about filmmakers, and of course there are biographies and so on, I just think this does quite an extraordinary sweep of ideas and themes, and to just begin with people like Safdar Hashmi and then go on to very contemporary opinions. It feels like a very complete and satisfying book. So, I mean, the editor is not me, that's Ajita, who's also on the call. And I think it just, between Ajita and Shamo, they've just created a book that is going to stand apart for a long time. So, as publishers, we're just very thrilled to be the publishers.
Will it sell, Karthika?
I think it's going to have sales to a very limited, I guess.
You don't have to answer that.
Limited number of readers,
You
but
never
it's going to
ask such
stand for a
questions. Come
long
on.
time.
You're not allowed to ask such questions.
No.
But yeah, Karthika, so what you were saying, so I mean, I really like this bit in Shamo's intro in the editor's note, a very typically candid Shamo. The piece, a last bit before I leave the room, the pieces are inconsistent in tone and tenor, and that's entirely deliberate. The attempt was to bring in relevant people from diverse persuasions and backgrounds and let them speak the way they wanted to and have something for everyone. The personal and the academic, theories and reminiscences, and whatever falls in between and beyond. I like the mix. And there might also be the occasional contradiction among the writers when it comes to facts, memories, playing tricks. That's something that, I mean, if you're going to be honest about an anthology like this or a memoir or whatever, that will always be the case. So I like that admission, and I think I mean, I haven't read the whole book by any means, but from what I have read, including the pieces that Shamo had sent me right at the start, while I was working on my piece, the canvas is really impressive here. The canvas and the range, and yes, of course, inevitably there is a bit of overlapping, as Shamo also admitted, but that's fine for a book of this sort, and for what it's trying to do, and the different tones.
I also think, Jay, that the images, the illustrations, the design.
We can't not mention those.
Yeah, I
Actually,
think they really
I have a few images here, but I've had a problem with screen sharing. I'm just trying to do that.
Can I
Karthika, sorry, just go on.
No. I was just saying that that's an angle to the book, which I just feel that the experience of reading this book is also something that hopefully readers of Ghatak, I mean, what viewers of Ghatak will enjoy. That there is a visual side to this book as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there it
yeah,
is.
yeah. There's some beautiful images, through the book. Just and it's it's a really lovely publication. Of course, apart from these original illustrations, there are also other the visuals, that are very very.
Yeah, I didn't want to overdo it,
Yeah.
but yeah, this young man who did the illustrations is very good. And yeah, and very imaginative. It was obviously the idea was to have one illustration from one clear scene that defined the film that you could easily tell which film it was,
Yeah.
and do 8 of those. Yeah.
He isn't here, right, Shaumitra?
Oh, no.
He's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to yeah. I don't know if I can share screen, that I could have shown the rest of them, but yeah.
No,
Anyway,
I think you probably
buy
can.
the
You
book.
can, you can try and figure it out. But meanwhile, can I just I know, like I mentioned, some of you, including people on my film group, have been watching Ghatak with some enthusiasm. Anyone wants to weigh in about a favorite film or about a discovery or something? Pradum, Tipu, Meet, you had mentioned that you've been watching the films. Anybody wants to just say something? Raise your hands or just weigh in, because we're opening this out anyway. I'm sure we'll keep talking.
Sure, I
There's
can
enough.
go.
Yeah. Yes, you are.
So my discovery was Barithe Kapaliye, which I have to say is such a brilliant city movie about somebody who's new or lost or finding their way about a city, which I thought was very beautifully done. And of course, if you're from Calcutta, there's so many landmarks, Kolkata landmarks, all through the movie. And I mean, it's there in some of the other movies also. But in this particular thing, the kid was so he had a little bit of a street smart streak in him, which I liked. He was not completely a bhola bhala kid trying to, getting beaten up everywhere and getting kicked around by fate. He was a little bit in controlling his own destiny. And I think I was mentioning that the first parts when he gets into trouble with his father, who's a strict school teacher, village school teacher, and he escapes. And that part reminded me a little bit with the shadows, and as he's running away from his parents and he's missing his mother, and it reminded me of Night of the Hunter. Those scenes when he is escaping down the river. Sorry, not he. The two kids are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tipu, you hadn't seen the film before?
Have we lost people?
You might have, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a very accessible film, which I think for a bunch of you mentioned it here.
Yeah, I think yeah, you went off for a few seconds, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my internet is a bit unstable, unlike me.
Was it your first time watching the film?
I mean, first time in a good print, I'd seen it. Like, I think everybody has seen it as a kid, as a child, but obviously they don't make all the connections then. So I was watching it with as a more sentient being for right now, this time when I saw it. And the YouTube thing was pretty good. The print was very good. So that was my point. Previously, it was just.
I have to say, I also enjoyed the interview of the actor who played the kid, obviously much later in life, which Amos included in the book, because
I love that too.
It's just so nonchalant, and he just here he is playing the lead role in this film made in 1959. What a year for world cinema, right? I mean, one of the great years for world cinema, by a major director, even if this particular film by Ritwik Ghatak is not something that has been talked about a lot in the context of that year, but it could be included, and he's played the lead role in it. And then 50 years later, whenever that interview is, here he is just talking about the fact that he just did it. Yeah, he never felt any interest in acting ever again. Never really stayed in touch with anyone. Yeah, it's fine. I just found that really interesting.
That interview was done for this book.
Right. So that's more than 60 years later.
Yeah, 70 almost. Yeah.
64, 60.
Yeah.
65, wow.
I remember the kid. I remember reading an interview of the kid because I remember he's got a very unique name, Param Bhattarok. It's not a name that, though, I mean, for me, it was a name which seemed as unique as mine. So I already felt some kind of amity with him. But I remember reading, I think it was in Anandamala, this magazine, this Bengali magazine from the ABP stable, kids magazine, and reading about him and reading about his experiences I mean, this must have been in somewhere in the late 70s when I read it as a kid then. But yeah, so that one I thought was more accessible. But then you see some of his more political cinema, and like I rewatched Komal Gandhar last night, and then all the other ones, and I'm like, how does somebody outside of Bengal, outside of that very unique partition experience, appreciate some of these films? Like, I'm obviously from there. My parents have had very similar experiences. They know some of the same people. My mother knows this actor or that thing, and like that, I can see how it would appeal to them, because it really speaks to them, speaks to the experiences that my parents had. It speaks to, and for me, the Calcutta part of it is of his experience that I myself had growing up there. And so that was something which has always, and then that's something which I'm really looking forward to reading about in your book, Shamo, is that how does somebody outside, I mean, obviously, Jay, you are one of those people. I mean, what do they get out of those stories? Because I feel it is so much about a time and a place. And yeah, Paritosh, I agree. I mean, it is maybe it's a very universal thing, the partition and the being displaced, and obviously I'm seeing that in America right now. I'm in America, I'm in California, and I see there right now how the displacement and being a refugee is such a universal experience, and it's a story that everybody has. Yeah, I'll go off now.
No, yeah. Paritosh.
Jananpur, you have something?
Yeah.
I mean, since we are talking about Bari Theke Paliye, I mean, just 2 cents of mine. There's an interesting inversion that goes on in the adaptation, because it's adapted from a novella. I mean, I'm assuming Jay hasn't read it, because I don't think it has been translated.
Oh, I don't think so.
And the interesting thing about the inversion is that there is a wish fulfillment in the end of the novella, because it's written for the children. And that wish fulfillment doesn't happen in... and the other thing that's interesting is that the novella is set against the civil disobedience movement, whereas this one is obviously set against partition. So there is a very much a reason for setting this film against partition. So I think the film is very political in its own way, but it doesn't wear the politics on its sleeve, unlike some of the...
It's set in the late 50s when it's made, but there is a reference to the Kali Banerjee character having been affected 10 years earlier by partition. I think that's, if I remember right.
Yeah, I mean, some of the shots of the refugee UCRC, United City Refugee Council, which is so that was I'm sure this is a shot taken from a little earlier period which is kind of integrated to the film. So, but yeah, like I said, it's not an overtly political film, but it's very much political in terms of its inversion.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think with the Kali Banerjee role, Horidas, I don't think it ever mentions partition. It just talks about leaving home. I don't remember offhand, but I don't think it specifically mentions Desh Bhag or partition specifically.
I mean, it does. It basically fantasizes. So, so Kali Banerjee basically says there was a country, but I had to run away from there.
Yes.
Yeah, there is an undercurrent, at least an undercurrent. Yeah.
And then they walk in the procession of the UCRC. So there's a political procession where they walk, and the boy gives slogan, which basically is in a way a bit of a political education for the boy. Which is...
There's also the old woman.
Yeah.
Who's looking for her? Yeah.
I will stop. That's all my 2 cents.
Does anyone else want to weigh in about films that Ghatak films that...
I see your hand there, Pradumna.
I still can't see. Yeah, Pradumna, just speak up. I can't even see his...
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi.
So, my views for whatever there were. Meghe Rajatara was the first Ghatak film I had watched some 21 years back, and again during my revisit now, it was again the first Ghatak film I revisited, and of course I've watched a few in between. But what I'm struck by it is, like Shamya also used the word not very polished, and how different it is from the conception I had of what art films were like when I watched it like 20 years back. Say when you compare to Ray, how rough around the edges it is, the tonal shift, and something and Rio had this very stately kind of way of expressing emotions, and this had this emotional brute force, and also uh, like the acting of people like Bijon Bhattacharya and Anil Chatterjee. So very different from what you would expect in a normal drama, and the sound design. Yeah, so that's all I just wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so the sound design, of course, I was really struck by when I watched it in optimum conditions this year. Beautiful print, subtitles, proper subtitles. Pradum, do you know Bangla? If you watched it 21 years back, did you actually get good subtitles?
So my college had arranged it, so I'm guessing, yeah, it was with the subtitle print.
Yeah, so this is one of the things I've mentioned. I mean, I've written about this in the piece. I watched that film at I think it's Refort Auditorium Film Festival around 22, around the same time, around 21, 22 years back, and it was bored like anything. It was a terrible print. It's the subtitles were like, they had been put together by, Master Yoda on drugs or something, or a dyslexic kangaroo, or whatever. It's and they were yellow. So you couldn't even see them against the lighter parts of the frame most of the time, and poor print, poor sound, everything. And watching it earlier this year, I have to shamefacedly say on my laptop, but excellent print, excellent sound, and I was just so immersed. I don't think, I mean, I'm not trying to get into facile comparisons or anything, but I don't think I've been that immersed in a Ray film ever as I was in Megadagatara, watched in the optimum conditions. And I almost wasn't expecting it. I was actually thinking after my Bari Theke Pali experience, I thought, okay, maybe I need to be watching the under the radar Ghatak films, and maybe the best known Ghatak film is something that maybe I can sort of just set aside for now and not worry about too much. But that's not how it turned out at all, and it makes such a difference. It makes such a difference because that I can't begin to convey what an enormous experiential difference there was between my first viewing of this film 21, 22 years ago and what I saw earlier this year. They were just two completely different.
But the really unfortunate part about, not the really unfortunate part, but one of the many unfortunate things about Ghatak is actually, Arijit Sen is here, and Jay, you remember him from your days working.
Oh, yeah. Hi, hello.
Is that, the unlike Ray, I think we keep talking about Ray as we talk about Ghatak, but unlike Ray, who was obviously so global and so organized and everything else, is that Ghatak's family has just never paid enough attention to any of this. And Arijit and I actually considered, I think this was about 10, 12, 15 years back, offering our services to subtitle his films. Reach out to the Ritwik Memorial Trust and do it, but it's a mess, and there's no one who's ever done anything, and there's no one there who's ever going to allow anyone else to do anything either. So I think some good stuff has happened from Criterion and BFI, who have restored his films, and I believe some of them are now available with good. Fortunately, I haven't needed the subtitles so much, but I believe they're available with good subtitles now. Yeah. I saw a question just now. Jay, do you want to say something?
I think Pavan Ji wants to.
Paritosh asked something, and there's also somebody who has the hand
Pavan Ji wants to, I think, speak.
PJ.
Jay,
Pavan Ji.
Hi.
This is P1 prefixed with Jay.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah. So anyway, I have just received my copy about an hour ago, and it looks.
Oh, P1 Pavan. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I guess.
So I got my copy delivered an hour ago, and it looks terrific at first glance. Superb work, guys. And apart from those sketches, the blurred and tonal screenshots are bringing so much of hauntingness that is associated with the cinema of Ghatak. I have just had a glance, but really loving it, having it in hand. And I have a very specific question for both Shamya and Jai. Jai, for you also.
Yeah.
Because it is about a very strange and unique collaboration of Ritwik Ghatak with Hrishikesh Mukherjee, where realism meets fantasy, depression meets humor, the human condition meets humanity. So, how do you see them influencing each other? Or somewhere Ghatak is completing Mukherjee as a filmmaker. Like if you take Suvarn Lekha's Closure, it is such a heartbreaking film for me. It is one of my favorites. And Satyakam's Closure, that acceptance for that child. The themes are somewhere coming from the same. Of course, there's no partition kind of a reference in Satyakam, but still that humanity, that human angle, that where the tradition is accepting that deprived section of that in that particular kid. Somewhere, since they have worked together on a very, very beautiful film, experimental film called Musafir. So somewhere that kind of collaboration, probably, even if we take the Amitabh Bachchan's monologue in the beginning of Anand, so you feel that kind of that has a different tone from the rest of the film.
Yeah.
So somewhere I feel, because Musafir itself was such a great mix of different genres. There's a melancholy, but hope also, depression, humor, satire, and of course, the core theme of displacement in that home. Even if it is not partition related, but there's this, everyone is being displaced and coming to that home and again getting displaced.
Yeah.
So somewhere, how do you see the collaboration working? And I always feel Hrishikesh Mukherjee brought a lot of elements from Ghatak, but he softened them out and made it much more accessible to people and more mainstream.
I'll let Shamu actually has an essay right at the end of the book called Madhumati, Musafir, and Disillusionment: The Bombay Years, which is a little more about Ghatak and Bombay cinema. I think this is it's a complex topic. I'm not really sure what I can say about it, except to point out that you mentioned that opening scene in Anand, which is such a sort of cynical is the word. I mean, it's in itself, I think it's a reductive word, but it's but let's not forget, I mean, Hrishikesh Mukherjee, we engage in binaries about these people. That this person made these beautiful, lovely, soft, friendly, comfortable films. This other person made these hard-hitting films. Hrishikesh Mukherjee is the same man. If you read some of his interviews, he comes across as one of the most cynical people you can find anywhere. He said, there's that quote which I put in the book about how evil. He just said very matter-of-factly in an interview. He said, evil is always going to be much more effective than good can be. You put a drop of poison in a bucket full of milk, the milk is spoiled. If you try the opposite, it won't have the slightest effect. This is the man who made Golmaal and Chupke Chupke and all these lovely, warm, affirmative films. So there's a limit to which I think we can, draw too many lines or categorize them. I will just say this, that, when I was working on the book, and I think I mentioned this in the essay, I was really struck. I mean, I loved Musafir. I really loved it. On some level, it also made me a little more afraid of the idea of Ritwik Ghatak. Because I was thinking that, इसके बाद ऋषिकेश मुखर्जी ने फिर अगले साल अनाड़ी बनाई, which is the film that is imbued with the spirit of Raj Kapoor and RK films, and it's in many ways it's as much a Raj Kapoor film as a Hrishikesh Mukherjee film. Then he went on to make all these really sort of these warm, light, breezy films. And usse pehle, when he had the Ritwik Ghatak influence on him, he made something like Musafir. which from where he could have gone in a completely different direction as a filmmaker. And again, just to repeat, I loved Musafir as well, but I'm not sure what a Rishikesh Mukherjee who went along that path would have looked like, and what sorts of films would have come out of it. So on some level, maybe just on a subconscious level, watching Musafir made me a little more afraid than I was of Ritwik Ghatak, as an idea. I won't say, but Shamu, do you have any thoughts on this?
And one more question.
Sorry.
Well, a very difficult one, of course, because this is somewhere, I feel it very difficult when creative people collaborate together without having a specific line drawn, especially when you say written by Rishikesh Mukherjee and Ritwik Ghatak. So you don't know who is bringing what. So who do you think is the architect of Musafir in terms of that structure, that anthological, that three-layered sub stories? Who could be that? Because we were not there. We don't have any authentic documentation or statement on that. So somewhere it's a beautiful mix, because Ishida again didn't make anything like Musafir.
Yeah.
So that is somewhere I feel Ishida in fact bought a lot from Ghatak in a way. That kind of melancholy and all.
So just to inform everyone else here, Pavan Jha was meant to write on Musafir for the book, but didn't. But anyway, and I guess would have been best placed to answer the questions he's raising here. But
those were the questions I had faced while writing that.
It never came, so it's not in the anthology, unfortunately. But obviously, there's no answer. We don't know. But I just one small observation about Musafir is again going back to that whole theater thing. That space. It's one house or 2-3 spots in a house that the whole film, 3 different stories in a way interconnected, connected only by the house, take place. I think it's a lot of the theater concept again that he brought into Nagorik, and as we discussed earlier, that he brought a lot of his theater into his. I'm talking about Ghatak, obviously, not Mukherjee, but that is certainly something that there is to note about it. But also, Jay mentioned the essay I've written right at the end of the book about the Bombay years, and there was a lot of collaboration between all these Bengalis and Bombay in the 50s. So who influenced whom, how much? Yeah, they're all gone. So it's impossible to say, but a Bimol Roy and a Rishikesh Mukherjee and a Ritwik Ghatak, of course, Ritwik Ghatak made very different films eventually from these people, but these were all phenomenal minds. I mean, surely we agree on that. Shamya Choudhury was there.
Absolutely.
So many others. Shashadhar Mukherjee, who, of course, we think of as this producer of big mainstream films, but he created Filmistan, again, a fantastic mind. People who wanted to do things, market forces perhaps impacted which way they went, but there's no denying that these were phenomenally gifted people who were together a lot. Keshta Mukherjee was living with Ritwik Ghatak for a year. I mean, of course, we know him as the drunk of Hindi films, but that he was a very competent actor to start with who got typecast is undeniable. So there must have been a lot of...
And a terrific cameo in Musafir.
Yes, of course.
That physical effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That song sequence also, the Milawat Banawat, the sequence.
As in Bari Theke Paliye, where he plays the magician, street magician.
Yeah.
So yeah, these were. So I'm sure people influenced each other, and I think the look of that house seems very Ghatak plus theaterish. But beyond that, I don't know. Amborish raised his hand, and there are a couple of emojis of raised hands.
Gaurav Ghosh, I think, wanted to say something.
Yeah. Amborish, what do you think?
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
I can't specifically, of course, say who added what. I mean, none of us can. But in terms of parallels, there are very interesting parallels, interesting commonalities between their worldviews, of course. I mean, they work together. Both Rishikesh Mukherjee and Ritwik had common obsessions, pursuits. A lot of, they were both committed Marxists. there was that tinge in Rishikesh Mukherjee's storytelling. The working class. There is, of course, Namakram. So many other films where that class struggle is reflected in his own way. I do not know whether that hammer and sickle in Coolie is Rishikesh Mukherjee's handiwork or anything, but he was the editor.
It
So
was something else
I don't think so.
behind. That is something we cannot talk
sure,
here.
sure. But just jokes apart, and I, what I was trying to get at is that they had certain common obsessions, and there were certain parallels in how they, the kind of stories they picked, and how they sort of depicted certain characters. Both Rishida, Mrinal Sen, Ritwik, they were very close buddies, and their worldviews were. Um, there were parallels how they but of course the approach was very very different. The approach to storytelling was very different in their cinema also. Ritik, I think Musafir, he was credited for screenplay, was he not? I think he was credited for screenplay, and the story was Rishikesh Mukherjee, and the dialogues were uh, Mr. Bedi, Rajinder Singh Bedi.
Yeah,
I
possibly.
think
He was also working with Filmistan at the time. Yeah.
yeah, I think
Although really some of those writing credits are so dicey and
yes they
so
are.
hard to trust anyway. I
Yes.
mean, I don't know about Musafir, but definitely by the time the late 60s and the early 70s came along, it was just a complete hodgepodge at times, where writers were sort of
Even Madhumati,
Some of
I
the
honestly, I don't see it coming from somebody like Ritik. I mean, it could have
some
at
of the
some level.
record stories are there which we cannot discuss here, because
Yeah,
I have got some very interesting first-hand accounts, especially with Bimal Rai and Rishikesh Mukherjee School, where
yeah.
actually in those times credits were not that important. Who gets work and who gets money was much more important. This film में राजेंद्र सिंह बेदी के पास
Yeah, so I mentioned that in the Rishikesh Mukherjee book also,
yeah.
but then I also have to say that I mean that I have had two completely contradictory stories from Gulzar Saab
Yeah, exactly.
based on his moods at the time.
Yeah.
Which can happen to any of us. I mean,
Yeah,
any of us in that position would
Yeah.
be memory is unreliable. You're one day or in a self-aggrandizing mood, and another day or in a self-lacerating mood. It can happen. But then this does greatly complicate matters for those of us who are trying to be chroniclers.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Of something like a collaborative art form. It really. I think the best we can do is to not take any of this too seriously and to sort of not think that any of it is set in stone.
Yes.
So the. But Pavan, anytime you feel like just leaving a voice note for us, which can disappear as soon as we listen to it, I think we'll all be happy.
So Gulzar, चलो बाद में बात करेंगे. अभी
नहीं. Okay. Somebody has gladdened my heart by telling me that Ritwik Ghatak was a great fan of Psycho, or so I see it.
Who said that?
It's there in the chat.
Okay.
I mean, I'm exaggerating. It's
no, it's me. Yeah, so Ramesh Joshi once said in an interview, Mohinagda has told me this story, that the ending of, believe it or not, the ending of Suvarnareka is, so Ritwik Ghatak basically asked Ramesh Joshi to watch that scene repeatedly and follow the editing pattern.
Okay.
Final scene.
That's a cruel thing to do to anyone. Shamu, sorry, if did Gaurav had his hand up?
Yeah, Ghosh.
I don't know if he's here right now, but Paritosh had also asked this question about the use of music in Ghatak films.
Hi, so this is to pick up from what Shamu was saying about Ghatak's legacy. I think it's one of those rare cases where, the art has really transcended into not just his life, his afterlife even. Because as he was pointing out, that not many people could do anything about it because of the trust and everything. And I had been roped in. This was before COVID. And there was some controversy about who's going to run the trust. But the tragedy is that no one could really actually do anything about it because his son was in very bad health and in worse mental health. And even though some people had good intentions, they were not there in the city, and we couldn't actually make anything out of it. And I don't know what remains now.
Exactly. In fact, certain members of the family, of course, all families have their own internal politics and so on and so forth, but there's a lot of ill will towards Ritik's wife for certain aspects. I don't want to get into details, not that I know much myself.
Yeah.
But there's all of that, and there's this person who, when I first heard about her, I'll tell you what I thought.
Yes, I know about this person. This is
I actually had very happy thoughts about her. So I'll just come to that. In the sense that there's this woman who is supposed to be Shamya Ghatak's niece or grandniece.
Yes.
Who apparently took away a lot of material and has got rights to certain things and so on. So around the time I heard about this, of course, most people in the family hate her or the concept of her. I don't know if they've even met her. But I thought it was a positive development because no one in the family was ever doing anything. Ritwik Ghatak had died 50 years back, or now 50 years back, maybe 40 then. And I thought even if this person did it by not very clean means, Ritwik Memorial Trust itself was a mess. Ritwik Ghatak is the only living member of it. And like you mentioned, he's not in any sort of physical or mental health to do anything useful or harmful. He can't do anything much. And therefore, I felt that she would be able to do something, but I don't think much has happened. I don't know. With all the material that she has, she's got fantastic photographs that Shamya Ghatak had, which obviously I couldn't access for the book. Yeah, if you know what happened to all of that, you can tell us, because I think between her and Ritwik's elder daughter's first husband, they have taken away a lot of stuff.
So basically, there was her who was chiefly concerned with the material and for her own gains or whatever. I can't judge right now.
Yeah.
And there were people who were concerned about Ghatak's son. So there was a tiff between these two groups, and the group concerned about his son wanted to take her to court, but then that never really happened because the pandemic struck.
Yeah.
So I don't know what is going on right now. I don't even know whether Ritwik is still there or not.
He is. He lives in a hospital, in a room in a hospital that the West Bengal government sort of.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so that's it. It's a bit off topic, which is why I lowered my hand after raising it. But yeah.
Shamu, any thoughts on the use of music? Because again, I think I told you this. I was so affected by the Uma Sangeet in Meghe Taka Tara, listening to it with small mercies with really good sound quality for the first time, and it just it was just there. Of course, as you know, I'm also a big fan of insistent background music, which some people don't like because they feel it's music that's trying to manipulate their emotions. I love my emotions being manipulated if I like the music, so I like that sort of thing anyway. But the way it plays out in that film, but also some of the more contrapuntal sounds and tunes or whatever. Any thoughts about that on the sound design?
See, again, okay, firstly, obviously, I'm not an expert, but firstly, for the Uma Sangeet and the Agumoni Sangeet and the various music bars or pieces that are used that are taken from religious practices is again something that we discussed it earlier, restricts Ghatak to a very Bengali audience, I suppose. And you're listening to it, maybe it sounds nice, but you don't really know what it means. That's there. Meghe Taka Tara is especially fantastic. The sound design, because of course there are the Robinho Sangeets which are there's a context to them when they take place, and that is actually the one film where one of the primary characters is a musician, is a singer, and that sort of lends itself to allowing more music to come in. So what I've read in these essays, many of these essays, is what an obsessive, how much Ghatak loved music. The fact that, I was talking to Arun Khopkar just a couple of days back, and he talked about Ghatak's command over Hindustani classical music, and how he could play the sarod well, how he could play the flute well. And these are obviously, certainly the sarod is not an instrument you can just pick up and start playing. He used Bahadur Khan, who directed the music for most of his films, and he were very close friends and spent hours working together. You're obviously talking about the IPTA, where Salil Chaudhary, Hemantu Mukherjee, many others who might not be so well known outside Bengal, like Himangu Biswas or various others, were very much a big part of it. Debobroto Biswas, the singer, and many others were part of the IPTA. A few of them were suspended. Jyotirindra Moitra, of course, who were also sort of kicked out of IPTA and CPIM at some stage or the other. So these were all fantastic musicians, and Meghita Katara is a classic example of, and I haven't watched as many films as from around the world as maybe Jay or Tipu and some of the others have, but I haven't come across too many examples. Certainly then, now it's a different story altogether, but then of a track of classical music or song merging with sounds like the rustling of leaves, or with daily household things like children crying, or a seller of something calling out as he passes by, or actually of the rice boiling in the vessel. And how it all comes together. And there's a story, I've forgotten who writes it, I can find it, of course, of Ghatak once sitting with Ramesh Joshi at the editing table and creating sounds deliberately. And in one case, a window to a projection room was broken or open, and the whirring of the projection actually came in. And they discussed it, we just shut it and all that, and Ghatak allowed it to stay on and merge with whatever he was working. Quick example from something Bhaskar Chandravarkar writes. Bhaskar Chandravarkar was a musician, and he was also the music teacher at FTII at the time. If I can just read a little bit from him, that answers the question really. It was in the small hours of the morning, 3:30 a.m. at the end of April, an extremely hot Pune summer, yet the early dawn was cool, calm, and joyous. A tall man, over 6 feet tall, clad in white dhoti and kurta, was engrossed in beating the life out of a variety of instruments in the recording studio at the FTII. He got them to produce unusual sounds. He blew on the Indian flute to get a shrill, whistle-like sound, banged a Burmese gong, and carried on thus for a fair while. This was the well-known Bengali filmmaker Ritwik Ghatak. Our music recording session and his drinking had started simultaneously the previous evening. He went off to sleep by 9 p.m., having had a peg too many. Certainly more than he could hold, but was now refreshed as only Ghatak could be in the early hours after drinking that much. The recordist, the orchestra crew, and I were flabbergasted by this show, unable to understand what was happening. Only after 2 months did we hear and see and understand what all the noise was about. When the short film this was for was complete, aside, this is for Fear, because it's in that chamber with the noise around. When the shoot for this short film this was for was complete, it left all of us stunned. The weird sounds Ritikda had created that early April day suddenly came alive as we watched Fear. Months later, I happened to see almost all of his films, most of them object lessons for students who want to learn the use of music in films. If one were to set out to list films that make the best use of music, Ritikda's Meghita Katara would lead the rest, while his Shubhanurekha would probably take second place. There's obviously someone who loves him and is talking about him, but you get the idea of a music teacher at FTII talking about his art. And Ritwik Ghatak. So, obviously I'm no expert, so it's best to explain what he tried to do with his music, with an example from someone who's written about it in the book. There was another person, unfortunately, I think there was a question in the chat. There was another gentleman who was going to write a piece on Ghatak's music. Fortunately, we have this, and there are references to Ghatak's music or music in Ghatak's films in many other essays. But that essay couldn't happen, but this is very useful.
So this book that I just mentioned by Rochana Majumdar, which I had done a very short review of it for India Today, I think, academic-ish book, but this has some interesting things in it about Ghatak and the use of music and classical music and stuff. Yeah.
There is an article on music in Cinema and I, which could be very insightful, where he talks about the use of music in Indian cinema and how he intends.
There's a very interesting article on literature in Bengali cinema that we've managed to include in this collection. That's very illuminating. I find it very, very useful. That's also from Cinema Night.
There's a piece by Shubhankar mentions Adur Gopalakrishnan. There's a piece by Adur Gopalakrishnan in the book as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also Salil's collaboration was very interesting.
Absolutely.
Salil
Absolutely.
Choudhury and Bari Theke Paile. It was actually I explored that film through Salil Choudhury only while working on that, and that Ailam Re Calcutta and that Haridasar Bulbul Baja.
Yeah.
Bringing that to cinema and that folk tradition and bringing.
Is there a Hindi version of Haridasar Bulbul Bhaja?
No.
Because
there's another Bengali version by Hemanta itself in Samrat Prithviraj, I think.
Shriman Prithviraj.
Of course. But this one on Robi Ghosh in.
Yeah.
But
the other song in Bari Theke Paliye,
Mari Omar, that's a beautiful Savita Banerjee song.
No. I'm talking about the folk song.
Ailam Re Calcutta. No.
That's of course in Half Ticket with Kishore.
Yeah. Lelo re lelo ye dil ka hira sacha.
Kishore Kumar singing that, of course, Salil Choudhury.
But that Bengali version has its own such a beautiful.
So the moods are completely different, but both are Salil Choudhury, of course.
And of course, visually.
Yes.
That's such a beautifully picturized song.
Yeah.
So that is a favorite musical, if you say. Yeah. And of course, there's been a lot of poetry also in Ghatak's films. I think Kumal Gandhar and even this child actor in Suban Rekha, in the end he reads that poem, and also that also brings beyond music also there's a lot of poems and poetry in his films.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Shamo, did you cover the sounds in Megadagatara? The whip. Sorry,
I think the whip is there in mentioned in about 10 essays.
It's mentioned in 10 essays.
Which Jay mentioned at the start in my introduction that there's a lot of overlap. But that's what I mean. Person makes 8 films, and you want to write 50 essays with it. Of course, I could have not done 50 essays, but if you want 50 essays, and this is such a very, very seminal moment or use or innovation, it will come in here and there. But certainly it is there. Yeah. Can I just mention one interesting thing I just thought about is many essays obviously reference the ending of Megadagatara, where Supriya Chaudhury's Nita character is dying, or the death is probably not shown, but is about to die. And there's this whole sequence of wails. I find it very interesting, and I can't explain this. So the common memory reference for it is Dada Ami Bachte Chai, Dada I want to live. But some of the wails also refer to Dada I wanted to live. But Dada I wanted to live. But Dada I only wanted to live, and so on and so forth, as she goes on wailing. And various contributors use different lines. I find that very interesting. Whereas the obvious reference is Dada I want to live, I find it very curious that people use different words to say that. I wonder why that is. Certainly not Rashomon or anything, but certainly people interpret that or remember that in a way for what they want to remember her mood or point of view at that point, as that I want to live of a dying person, or I wanted to live for this, or whatever it might be, It's quite interesting. And that's also a very musical sequence, which
Yeah.
starts with a Pahari song,
Mm.
and the whales sort of merge with the landscape.
So,
And yeah.
The one interesting bit is that Dada Ami Bachte Chechilam, this line was there in a Utpallattu play called Ongar. That's
Hmm.
the not Dada,
Hmm.
but that one line where one character is dying in a deluge in a coal mine, and while dying, his last words, famous last words, in the context of that play was "Dada আমি বাঁচতে চেয়েছিলাম, আমি কিন্তু বাঁচতে চেয়েছিলাম,
Hmm.
but I wanted to live." And this play came out in 1959,
Hmm.
and Meghedaka Tara is 60. So very interesting. So very similar kind of lines. The other thing that I just quickly wanted to add was Komal Gandhar. Komal Gandhar very interestingly uh, brings to play a lot of his theatrical nuances about Ipta, and there's Nobanno in the first scene, if unless I'm mistaken. If, Komal Gandhar, when the film
Yeah.
begins,
Yeah.
they show a staging of parts of Nobanno, and Komal Gandhar is one of the two films where Ritwik signs off as authored by Ritwik Kumar Ghatak Pronito, which literally in Bengali translated into English is authored by, which is typically names signing off in books authored by people. But these were the two films, Jukti Tokko Goppo and Komal Gandhar, are the two films where he's credited as that. I don't know whether that's a pattern or there's a reason behind this, but it's just in.
so anyone else has any other observations or thoughts? Shamo, you want to say any last words dramatically?
Bachte
Apart,
Chechilam.
apart from go buy the book.
Yes, please go buy the book.
Which is the plaintive
Yeah.
call of every. Yeah.
Yes. No, nothing specifically. I mean, yeah, I think we were meant to go until 9:30, and we almost have, I thought. And I suspect, Jay, that we've had more people than we thought we would have.
Yeah, well, that, yeah.
Yeah. Tipu, of course, has chimed in with Dada Ami Kintu Boi Kinte Cheyechilam, which means Dada, I wanted to buy the book, which can't happen from America. So when you're here, but yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this book has, Brinda Bose. I don't know if she's come. She had some people over. She said she's one of the contributors. She's of course a teacher at JNU. Has written a wonderful piece on Ritwik's literature and poetry, like Amborish has written on Ritwik's theatre, and so on. So Brinda actually put up a post after she received the book talking about how, just looking at the book and having started to read it, he could sort of, I know it's a cliche thing to say, but she could sort of feel the love that sort of flows through the pages. And obviously, when you start out doing a book, you're just trying to craft it, just get people together, put it together, and so on and so forth. So you don't think love is what is going to be the sort of underlying thing through the book, but it really exists there. And many of the pieces are really of that. People who loved Ritwik Ghatak or hated Ritwik Ghatak but loved his films, one or the other. He was obviously not always very likable, undesirable drunk, as someone called him. But the films had something that were undiscovered for the longest time, and there were many reasons for it. Part of it is, of course, his estrangement from the Communist Party of India, which led to at least his earlier films almost not being allowed to release, and in some cases actually not being allowed to release, and just not reaching enough people. They are reaching people now because of the restoration work done by, like I mentioned, BFI and Criterion, which is fantastic. So yeah, the book, I think, primarily exists or came about because we wanted, or at least I wanted to start with, and after that, all these people sort of bought into the idea of taking Ritwik Ghatak in an accessible way to people who didn't know about him and people who are not Bengali. I mean, of course, there are lots of books on Ghatak in Bengali, but people who don't know about him. And that's, I think, what caused it to happen. And I think it's happened. Obviously, it's for the readers to say. I obviously feel it, but that's not enough. So it's for readers to say. So far, the feedback has been great. But I do think that in the mass of academic books on Ghatak, which all serve a purpose and which are all valuable in their own way, I think something accessible, of which there are many when it comes to someone like Ray, something that tells you about the person, tells you about, analyzes his work, talks about memories of him, and so on and so forth. There's a little something for everyone. More than a little something, there are 50 essays, so there are at least 5, 7, 10 essays for everyone. And yeah, so that was the idea. I think it's worked out. I don't know if it has. So
any chapter on documentaries?
Yes, a long one by this professor in Northumbria University called Dr. Sangita Sen.
Okay.
Which is entirely on his documentaries and short films together. It's a longish essay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like
So
there's one documentary
cover
on Baba Alauddin Khan.
Of course.
It's
Of course.
which has some very, very interesting classical musical pieces by various legends and Sarod,
if I'm not getting this wrong, he was a student of Alauddin Khan as well.
Yeah.
Ghatak.
I think so.
Briefly, but he was a student of Alauddin Khan as well. And there's the unfinished documentary about Ramkinkar Bej, also the artist. So this essay covers that. So
Okay,
has to cover as much as possible.
Great.
Yeah.
So looking forward to read this. So looking forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for being here. And Shamo, again, all the best to all of us who are part of the book, not just you. And maybe as you know that we are sort of spreading the word as widely as possible and putting it on social media, etc., etc. What is this that Tipu is doing? Okay, that's looks like a celebratory thing.
Jay, can I just interrupt to just say one thing?
Yeah,
no, just to say thank you to you and to all the contributors, not just you, and you in particular today for making this the very first conversation about the book, really. We'll be doing a lot more. There'll be events, there'll be conversations. I hope you'll all be part of it. And some of the contributors I know are out of
something in
reach.
Delhi at some point.
Yes. We're planning that as well. So we'll sort of write to all the contributors and keep everyone informed of how things are going. But it's been wonderful to have this be the first kickoff. So thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thanks again. And well, thanks for the book to both of you and Ajita. And that's it then. I'll send the recording out as well on my groups. The session is recorded. There are a few people who had asked for it separately, including a few friends who couldn't be here. And Shamo, of course, you can let me know if there are people who at your end who want the recording. I'll send it to you anyway.
Yeah, just send it to me and I'll pass it on. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.